So I guess the big question while we're here, what we want to take you through today is a journey of some of the things you need to think about in your communities within that first 72 hours of whatever that threat is, be it flood, fire, earthquake, avalanche, whatever. Let's be upfront about this and make it threat agnostic. But what this is trying to, I guess, communicate is about how, as a community, you can face anything. And that's my real message. And it is about those first 72 hours. Once that threat is decreased and people sort of come out of their initial sort of shock and response, using that first 72 hours, which is just a guide mark, it might take more, it might take less, to turn chaos, which will ensue, into order for your community. What we're going to provide is some insight and lived experience, as I said in the introduction, from someone who's done it, pretty much off the back of a napkin, to someone who's thought and worked with his community deeply about this. We're going to look at the post-disaster functions and processes, and then also look at some principles for how you plan, because the worst part in any of this is the fear of the blank sheet of paper. How do I start even filling this in? And that's the gaps we want to fill in today. So the first thing I want to talk about is the community disaster cycle. And this is my view. This is not a sanctioned slide from any particular government organisation. But when I think about disasters affecting communities, I think about it in 4 phases. The preparation phase, which we're all in at the moment, where we plan and network and get our stuff happening. The response phase, so something happens, bang, your community is put into its fight or flight mode, and whatever ensues will ensue, but we're essentially reducing threat, protecting life, and trying to save properties and stuff. It's very much the focal point of where this all begins, and sets the conditions for phase 3, which is that relief phase. It's where people have immediate needs that aren't always able to be met. There are so many needs that need to be met at that point in time, that no one organisation can catch all of them. And quite often government is focused up, and what communities need to be doing is focusing down and in, and importantly filling the gaps. And finally then that transitions into the recovery phase. And the recovery phase is deliberate. It can be planned. You've got the luxury of time. You've got the luxury of safety. You've got the luxury of less chaos and more order as those big muscly machines of government start moving into a community and working with people and actually taking time to understand the community, which is why there's the lag and why that orange circle is around the relief phase, because a community can do so much for itself when it understands itself. That takes government and other organisations and NGOs or non-government organisations and not-for-profits time to actually come in, orient to the problem, create a solution and start the cogs working to actually get that going. That might take 24 hours. In Cuddly Creek, that process to transition into that recovery piece for our community took 16 days, which was pretty gruelling for a community that was really still in deep shock. 84 homes lost in a town of 2,000 people is pretty much a punch in the throat. So people didn't want to leave, they didn't want to go anywhere else, they didn't want to go to the Mount Barker Recovery Centre, they just wanted to hunker down in their community. And as soon as they worked out that they could support one another, that was it. They stayed there. And then eventually, the government organisations started coming in once the threat was reduced, and at that point, the community just went, good, government, go. It is all about that initial look at what you are as a community in that relief phase as soon as that threat reduces. If you take anything away real headliney from today, it is the fact that this is all about the needs that your community may or may not have and determining them. It's about the resources that you may or may not have and that magically appear from nowhere, like a pallet of toothpaste from some dental place. That you never thought you'd need or want, but we use it all. And then finally the gaps. So needs, resources, and then what are those gaps? And if you start with that as an absolute bare base for your planning, you start filling in those blank sheets of paper really quickly. What does your community need immediately post any disaster? What are the resources you've got to look after those needs? And then, these needs don't have a resource that we can match to. What are those gaps and how do we remediate that and who do we need to speak to? So if this is tomorrow's fire danger rating, your planning and preparation time's over. It's time to act. It's end game and it's for planning and it's start game for getting into it. As soon as people see this, they shift their mindset, up in the hills if they've lived here for more than one fire season. And it's very difficult to get sense out of people when they go catastrophic fire day tomorrow. They feel it in their skin, that dry heat, that wind in their face. It puts panic through a community and you can't get sense out of people. The day before the Cuddly Creek bushfires, that's what Lobethal was like. People, they drive a bit mad, they're very tetchy on the phone, and so at that point, it's over. And if a spark does ignite something, or a flood comes through, or whatever that agnostic disaster is, your time to get ready for that is finished there, which is why we're here today, and that's really why I want to put that in context. What I appreciate more than anything is the opportunity to download what I've learnt, and by no means in Lobethal did we do it perfect. It was a goat rodeo, and I mean that in the truest sense of the word. It was just chaos for the first 24 hours. But with a committed community who are willing to join together, we managed to get through that event in pretty good order, really. I will say at this point that the reason we do this is not just so that we have a traumatic event, we get through it and sort of recover, and then we move on to normal life. What something like this has the opportunity to do in a community is turn a catastrophic event into something that will unite your community long term, that's nothing to do with bushfires or disasters or trauma. The second reason you do this is, I take you back to what Chris said about me, and I lost my house, pretty much got wiped. Saved my business, which is why I lost the house, because they needed to be defended simultaneously and I couldn't be in two places at once. But what it gave me was doing something bigger than myself for the community, serving others and giving back and organising something in a very ordered way actually saved me from the trauma that I otherwise would have suffered if I'd sat in the ashes of my house and gone, well, this is all bad, isn't it? I saw the house and I went, yeah, okay, right. What else can I do? Leave it and drive on into something else. And then what I saw that do was amplifying the people around the community. And now, so I went through the Black Saturday bushfires in 2009 in Victoria. And a lot of people did that in just communities in King Lake and places like that. They just sat there and went, what am I going to do? I don't know. The response of that relief organisation was so slow and they didn't self-organise, and long-term suffering of PTSD. In Lobethal, there's barely any PTSD amongst the people who got in on that big effort and actually look back at the fire as not a traumatic event, but a uniting event. An event where they did something meaningful and they did something bigger than themselves for others, and that's actually replaced that trauma in their mind. Now, I'm sure there's clinicians and academics who can actually put that into context and pick it apart and go, thumbs up. But from a layman's point of view, I look at the two distinct comparisons of 2009 in Victoria and what happened in Lobethal, and I think, wow, there's something there that, regardless of, shipping water out and fixing things and getting communities together, it's the looking back on it and the trauma that it avoided by getting people meaningfully employed in something bigger than themselves to unite them against a common threat, i.e. chaos, is really the gold dust that sits underneath a lot of this. So, there's me on my house. That was about a week after the fires. I finally got back there to have a bit of a look around and my mate took a photo. But imagine this. Your community suffered, some heavy damage to both public property infrastructure. Your mobile phone towers are down. You've got no power. You're in a community that's managed to be encircled by fire, so there's trees over roads. You can't get out. You can't get people in. The physical access is restricted to be able to get supplies or communications out. The whole thing's gone pretty much to hell in a handbasket, and you're sitting there in your community after the smoke's still sort of going through. You've got spot fires everywhere. You fought the fire all through the night. You wake up in the morning and it's just a completely transformed landscape, and that hits you in the chest and takes the air out of your lungs. There's people walking around with their mobile phones going, I've got no way of communicating. And they can't even cry. They're that shocked because the family that they evacuated doesn't even know they're alive. The family they evacuated doesn't yet know their house is burnt down, and that's weighing heavily upon you. You're looking around the community, there's people just in rags with nothing. And that's all very confronting. The trauma of that can really significantly imprint on people, and it can stop them from doing things to actually help themselves and others. And so this is why I wanted to, generally introduce a scenario in the bushfire context for a moment, to position you into a place to then see how we work through the rest of this morning's content. Is everyone happy with that as a scenario? I mean, we'll just work from that. It's a 40-degree day. You've got that hot wind. You don't know whether the fire front's going to shift and come back. How do you actually, work as a community when, quite obviously, the CFS are going to be where the threat is. They're not going to be back with you, looking after you in your town that the fire front's already gone through. So you're feeling very alone, which is how Lobethal felt. The community was on its own trying to fight spot fires, with whatever they could cobble together on the back of utes, while the CFS strike teams were off down at Bracunga, because that's where the fire still was at that point, on day one after the fires. So there was just nothing. I walked up the main street on that morning after fighting the fires all through the night, and it was like zombie town. There was about 450 people, 500 left in the town, again of 2,000. Everyone else had evacuated, and what was left was it was like a refugee camp. It was awful. And that's when I grabbed one of these old gentlemen who was, again, wandering around trying to get his phone to work, which wouldn't. And I said, look, just go and get anyone you can find in the town. Tell them we'll meet at the Oval at 11 o'clock. I didn't know what to do any better. I thought, that's a good start. And we'll talk about it as a community. He did that, and what happened after that is really the subject of what I'll be speaking about today. So a bit of context on what that scenario means. And I'll sort of start with the last point first. You're in this situation we've just discussed as a community. If you're in a community of 1,000 people up at your Radler or someone like that, you've been isolated, you've got no communications, you've got no power. Whether or not you've got water is another thing. People are shocked, people have lost so much. You may have injured people. The cavalry may not come for some time. And that's what we're preparing for today, is how do you be resilient in your community until the cavalry arrives over the hill to go, righto, we're here, we can actually sort this out, we can get you back in good order, we can start working out a recovery plan and get you back on your feet. It's that critical 72 hours that I want to talk about today with Chris. So we'll click back to the top, and that is, in a community like that, immediately after a fire, or any big disastery tragedy thing, floods are a bit different because they tend to move in and you've got warning time. Not always, but fires are a good example because bang, it's happened, and it's generally a 24-hour period of madness followed by that traumatic, chaotic, almost tinnitus sounding what is going on around me type visceral environment for your community. But the first point there is about the impact on victims and non-victims. So in a community that's gone through this, pretty much everyone's almost a victim, because even the non-victims and the people who saved their house are going to go through a whole bunch of guilt because they're looking at old mate there who's lost everything, and then the person who's almost got that survivor guilt is looking there going, oh, what do? I don't feel like I can do anything. I saved my house, they didn't. And it starts creating a lot of these psychological rub points and frictions in the community. So be aware of the fact that everyone's going to be suffering it, not just the people who've had fire damage or destruction or injury and things like that. The whole town will suffer together because of that sort of victim-survivor disparity that goes on. Information is so damn important at this point in time. One of the first problems you'll run across is looters. And that'll be the first myth you get. Regardless of whether there's looters or not, someone will say, I think there's looters. And then that will go through the community like craziness. And it's that type of information you've got to grip up quickly as, you know, an authority on what's happening. And that's why I write there, fact versus myth. Everything that comes out of your recovery centre or your community hub needs to be a fact, and it's got to be fact checked. You know, it's got to come from a CFS website, it's got to come from having spoken to a police officer, it's got to come from having a meeting with people to actually say, what is the ground truth in this? And if it's not the truth, don't say it. If it's not the truth and it's an assumption or an opinion, say that. Oh, I don't know, we think this, but just remember that's an assumption, or we think this might happen. You've got to be so clear in your language, because from experience, if you're not, you'll trip over yourself, and that will quickly become a exponentially exploding rumour that will knock this thing off of its feet, and you won't be able to actually move forward with a community that starts, you know, ripping itself apart on myths and things like that. So we'll go into some more detail about information later on. Leadership and direction. A lot of people go, oh, Lobethal, you know, they wouldn't have been able to do it with someone without your experience. Well, I actually did. I set up the first meeting on the first day. I gave some initial direction and guidance on how I wanted things set up and where. I appointed people and gave them some clear direction on what their boundaries and their responsibilities were. And then I escaped the town and started going and looking for people who could help us. Politicians, council, police, other stuff like that. Just cobbling together stuff out of the town. I left the town after about 36 hours. Or maybe 48, I can't remember. But I got out of there. And then the town self-organised itself based on that initial guidance and direction I sort of set up. All I did was literally turn the crank handle and got the engine going, and I left. And then I'd come back each day to report back to the community what I'd actually done. So in that sense, leadership, whilst important, is not the panacea. It is when you haven't prepared. But if you're preparing like you are now, there's no reason at all why you can't do what Lobethal did for itself without me even there. I'd come back some days and go, what's that person doing? Oh, we've just appointed them to do this because we thought that was a need based on a gap. Brilliant. That's excellent. And that was not my doing at all. What you can replace, you know, that sort of, and it is called inspirational leadership. You get in there and you grip up a situation, you make chaos look minimal, you make order look amazing, and people just gravitate towards that order, step back. That leadership is great if you haven't prepared, but what you're all doing today and what you have been doing and will do in the future is actually prepare. Everything I did just off the cuff is actually completely achievable by a community who thinks about this before the catastrophic needle hits catastrophic. Understanding risk and safety is probably should have been the first bullet point, but you've got to talk about other things first. If you do this, under the order will still be chaos. There'll still be that sense of people rushing, people being cavalier, people trying to do more based on the adrenaline that's running through their veins than they probably should. And the clear example of this is we were sending assessment teams out to go and look for people who we clearly knew might be aged, vulnerable, isolated in places, and we went, oh, we better go and check on them. We were just chucking people in cars on like the afternoon of day one to go and see if we could find people. That nearly ended in tears a few times, and so what we did, we stopped, get everyone in. From now on, every vehicle that leaves the township will have someone in it who's only there to do safety and to look at that team from a safety point of view. Don't step there. It's going to be a hole that's got burning ash underneath it. You don't want to fall over and break your ankle and have third-degree burns all up your leg. Yep, good, because people don't people think heroically, and they've got that adrenaline coursing through their veins, and they just want to get the job done, because it's a noble cause to go out and do stuff to help other people. And that very quickly throws all natural risk and safety analysis out of the window. So if you almost start everything you do and brief and talk and meeting with, let's just talk about safety and risk and tempo, let's bring that tempo down, you know. It's a really, really good way of starting it up contextually to get people's mind, first and foremost, thinking about not making this into the goat rodeo it could possibly be if you don't think about risk and safety. And the last one in this context piece is think about how your priorities are going to change as you go. The plans you'll write now will change. The priorities that you think might be important in any situation may evaporate on day one, and you may be presented with a whole bunch of new fun surprises that will change those priorities. So please be aware that by planning, don't try to plan as a purist. There's no sort of gold standard to plan this to, but having planned and having the networks and having the conversations, that's where the gold standard is. Don't think that you're going to be able to sort out what your priorities and your gaps are before you go into this with absolute clarity. What you got to do is get that MacGyver approach of just make it happen as it goes, and be agile enough in your thinking and disciplined in that agility to go, you know what, it's all changed. Let's have another meeting, because meetings are your great friend in all this. Getting people together, even if it's just once a day, to go, things have changed, folks. We've got to pivot and adapt to this new direction because that's where the gap is. Australia's still getting there with this type of, community-led, community-empowered resilience piece. We're a lot better than we were 20 years ago. We're much better than we were 10 years ago, and we're getting there. So your community will be in shock, and generally their needs are not being met in some way, shape or form. That might be a few needs not met, might be a cup of tea and a hug. It might be, we need emergency accommodation, clothing, medical, psychological, full noise gamut, everything. We're stuck on our own for 10 days and we're it. Community, drive on, regardless of, the cavalry ain't coming and we haven't got liability insurance, so this is it. Choose do nothing or do something. The big caveat though is that traumatic and dangerous situations are not times for guesswork. Emotions-based responses, and emotions-based responses you'll see up the wazoo. It's people who come in absolutely the antithesis of rationality. They'll want to charge off over the hill and do X, Y, Z. They'll collapse in a heap in front of you in absolute distraught anguish. And that triggers emotional responses in people who are trying to help. It mucks up your sense of safety, it mucks up your sense of risk, and it mucks up your sense of prioritisation. Because that person presenting with some sort of trauma response is going to drive you to, or going to potentially make you respond to them emotionally and do something that in rational times here and now, you otherwise wouldn't. And so it's definitely not time for cavalier and heroic approaches. Young 20-year-old male tradies are the worst for cavalier heroic responses. They will go at 10 tenths for 72 hours with no food, no sleep, get on the tins, smoke 1,000 cigarettes, and at the end of that 72 hours, they will be trashed because no one was actually looking at them going, hey, slow down, Mr. Normally electrician, now hero of the town. We hit that problem really hard because some of these young lads who are in the footy club, they're tradies, they're used to working hard under fairly, in the sun and in the rain, and they all of a sudden become bulletproof when their body's full of adrenaline and they take off over that hill and tackle the world and don't look after themselves. So as we go through the considerations, keep that in mind because it's about maintaining a really close eye on people's welfare and fatigue, but it's also about managing expectations and what people do. And we'll talk through some of that, and Chris will have some good insight as well. So here's an overview of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about these sort of 5 steps that I think really come back to the basics of what we're trying to achieve here. Gathering a team, which in many cases, so many of you have already done, but your team will grow exponentially once this thing kicks off with all these volunteers who very quickly see it as important. Understanding the situation that you're in, letting your community know what on earth is going on, establishing a system, and that will take some time, and then prioritising effort and managing tasks. So we'll tear into the first bit, which is gathering the team. So I've talked about leadership already. You'll still need leaders, and delegation is really important in this situation because not one leader can do everything. And busting this thing up functionally into such simple 3 as maybe triage, operations and logistics might be the best way to go about it for your particular situation. Every community is unique and you might not have a fully blown system nor need a fully blown system with everything down to a social media post manager and stuff like that. Triage, operations and logistics might do it for you, drive on. But in order to prevent that fatigue and that heroic effort that burns people out that I talked of, break things down into delegatable tasks. So if you've got one person who's just looking after the logistics aspects, making sure there's water, make sure there's tucker, get that sorted, and that's their little piece. That's their meaningful contribution to this whole thing. As time goes on though, who is in your team? And it's about recognising what the skills and availability is, what their vulnerabilities are as well, because some people come in thinking they can achieve lots, but actually become a burden because of some sort of vulnerability or some sort of bias or whatever they've got. And I ran into this trouble a few times where someone went, yep, I'll take this on, and it was just a complete disaster. So we had to sort of sit them down, change them out, get someone in there who was able to fulfil that function and drive on. I've banged on enough about this. Safety is your number 1 priority. Appoint people to only look at safety and nothing else and not be distracted from that, especially in this liability litigation business that goes on. If you've got someone with a keen eagle eye on that the whole time, you're in a much better position than just running off without anyone actually managing that risk. And the last bit is around roster management and things like that. So you might be a 3-person committee working through this at the moment with a pretty good understanding of your community, its needs, what the resources are and what the gaps are. You've got a place to go and do this all from. Last point on that is fatigue. Fatigue management is everything. If you don't get fatigue management right, you end up with your liability pings and accidents and crashes and busted stuff and hurt people. Next thing is to understand the situation. So you've got this team, your initial team together before the popcorn effect of volunteering starts. You've got those people who generally know what they're doing. You've all gathered in your spot, whatever that is, and you're there going, right, we've got a situation here. First thing to look at is your threats and risks. What's the risks to your team? What's the risk to the community? What's the risks to doing something or anything or nothing? You might choose that a risk is too great in a certain area to do something because a road's still full of burning trees. You know what, we can't do that right now. That's beyond our capability. We must accept that. It's sometimes a bitter and tough call that we can't go up a road to someone who we know is in trouble, but you're gonna have to swallow that. And it's about the prioritisation of risk management. Do what you can do safely. Then you start looking at opportunities. What can we do? We know what we can't do and what's too risky to do, so let's have a look at what opportunities we've got to actually drive at doing. And it might be simple stuff up front, just to, again, give someone the extension cord re-rolling experience that they need to keep their mind off of the trauma they've just gone through at that moment. So the opportunities, of course, grow with the volunteers. They grow with the resources, and they grow with the amount of need you have. Expect it to go in a situation where sometimes you have an abundance of resources you don't know what to do with on a certain day, like some bloke turns up who's threatened a police officer and pushed through a roadblock with a semi-float 30-tonne excavator on it and rocks up into the middle of the town and goes, "Where do you want me?" Didn't think you were even remotely an option to us, but hey, look, go out there and start moving stuff. And then the police followed him and had a chat, you know. But it's those, and at other times you just got, your resource bucket's empty, you're absolutely trashed, and you've got all these people screaming in with all these needs and stuff you've never even imagined. And so expect that disparity. You're not going to have, you know, nice Lego brick click together need to resource thing all the time. There's going to be gaps up the wazoo. The other thing about information and understanding the situation is getting ahead of, and I had this conversation during the break, getting ahead of what information you're going to need to be able to brief people so that you can look at what those threats and opportunities are. Get on the internet now and work out what you need. It's things like Alert SA, the CFS maps and warnings and incident site. Get an understanding of how they work, what you can actually do with them. You know, if you zoom in far enough, you can actually work out where the roads on the CFS website. It's awesome topographic mapping, and you can actually see where the roads are through the apple plantations that you can avoid certain roadblocks with. But what that gives you is a very powerful tool, especially when you synthesize the information. So when a big incident happens, you know, they'll actually put map overlays on the CFS incidents and warnings that give areas and warning zones, and they'll actually really enrich the graphic quality of what's on there for a specific incident. But then you can go onto the BOM website and start overlaying that with wind directions and things like that. Actually do, pardon me, the mental sort of putting together of what you're going to need if it really goes wrong. How do you know which roads you're going to use? Are you going to break your area up into sectors so that you can deal with one sector at a time based on who's been burnt and who's not? So have a look at what your mapping options are. Even if you print some maps out on a couple of A4 pages now and laminate them and put them in a box down at the town hall, that's better than nothing if you haven't got internet. The next one up is you go to the map shop and say, I want a map of my whole area with my town in the middle there, and that distance there is 15 kilometres. Print me that, it's about $250. They'll laminate it for you, roll that up, whack it in the town hall, you can get that going. You know, it's money for jam, but that map will just about be dead at the end of 10 days because everyone's drawn all over it with textures and poked it and put pins in it, but it will have paid for itself 60 times over. If you've got a map like that from one of these cartographic shops, or even online they'll do them for you, you can set the parameters with your town or location in the centre and away you go. So prepare for that information need now and try and work out what you can do with the resources that are available. And finally, information management. You want to be able to track everything you do and record everything you do. So we started from nothing with a couple of people who brought laptops in, and we had every hour someone with USB sticks go around and just download all the information we built in spreadsheets on case management, resource management, risk management. Then we had a tracker set up for everyone who was going out. So if a team of 20, my favourite, 20-year-old tradies were going out in a wagon to go and hook up some generators so some vulnerable people had air conditioning and fridges for medicine, yada, yada, yada. We knew where they were going, we knew who was in that car, we knew what time they were due back, and then there was that feedback loop when they came back where they came to that person managing that laptop to say, right, what did you find when we were out there? Well, when we were out there, we saw these fences were down, there was animals all over the road there. You need to go and euthanize them because they're all injured, they're all burnt, and while we were there, we did these tasks, came back, we've completed this stuff, log it all. And so there's where your efficiency and everything comes in, so that you're not repeating tasks, you're not sending people on wild goose chases, and you're tracking and recording everything you do. Before anyone asks the question, privacy is a massive issue in this. Again, like the liability stuff, you're going to have to manage it and be disciplined about it. We could have been shot full of holes for the stuff that we had on a spreadsheet. It's all destroyed now, but again, it goes back to first principles of good Samaritanship. You've got to get it done. And what do you do instead? Do nothing? Not on my watch. So drive on, be disciplined about it, get people to respect it, have constant meetings, limit the amount of people who've got access to the deep level of information, and that's how you're going to get your situational awareness that this particular slide calls for. And meet regularly. So don't just set the tasks and everyone goes. The tempo will overwhelm you as you're going through some of this, because there's always more people lined up, but just go and say politely to them, everything's stopping for the next 15, 20 minutes. It's, Mornos or Arvos or whatever it is. Everyone get a cuppa, breathe. Let's update each other on where we're at with all these situations. That's critical, because you can do all the understanding of the situation that you like, and that's all going to develop differently in everyone's minds. But until you synchronise that back a couple of times a day, it gets a bit disparate, and people start then going off on tangents that the organisation is put at risk by. Next piece is to inform the community. This is about keeping it absolutely bare bones simple. Don't try and go through some big, system of trying to debrief people, because they're only absorbing the most basic concepts immediately after something. So the template I used, which is very effective, is what do I know about this? Here's what I know. At the moment, we're locked into the town. We can't get out. We've got no communications and no power. We've got what we've got. We've got to make something with that. And I'm calling on everyone here to help me to do that. What we don't know when the power's coming back on. We don't know when we're going to have freedom of movement again. We don't know how long the police roadblocks are going to be in place for. Importantly, we don't know what the fire's going to do. We don't know which direction it might change. We don't know where the wind's going to go. Be prepared for that, because it's an unknown at this point. We don't know whether the threat's going to redevelop and further put us back into phase 2, respond, in which case we're all going to be back in the trenches again. The next bit's important. What I want you to do about it. What does the community need to do? First thing is be safe and look after each other. Check on your neighbours. If you can get back home, go back home and check 4 houses up and 4 houses down, or more if you want, and then come back and tell us what you find. Only do that if you can be safe. I want you to be able to come into the town and volunteer if you can. Let us know what resources you have. Do you have some stock feed that hasn't got burnt? Have you got a place where I can put escaped animals? Do you have transport? Do you have a generator? Start working out from that question what the community can actually contribute to the effort that you haven't thought about in the preparation phase. And then the final bit is what I'm doing about all of this for the community. I'm going to go out as soon as we've got this and set up a relief centre. We're going to provide what we can. Be patient with us because we're not there yet, but come in, expect that it's going to be traumatic, expect that it's going to be a bit chaotic at first, but we will sort it out. We will become a resource for the community that in time will develop into a resource that can benefit us all, and we'll get through this together. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to get out. I'm going to go and find people who can come back in here and provide us the support we need, like that NBN tower thing, Those 4 things: what do I know, what I don't know, what I want the community to do, and what I'm doing about it, were instrumental in settling people down and giving them a sense that this wasn't a complete chaotic, run off the rails schmozzle. And that all comes back to one thing: fact. If you only speak fact and you consistently speak fact and call it out when it's not a fact, like some of the questions from the audience, looters, you've got to shut it down immediately. And yes, acknowledge that it's a concern. Say, look, one of the team will get that down and have a look a bit further, and at the next meeting we'll report back as to whether there are in fact looters or whether it's something that is not necessarily something we need to worry about at the moment. So always root everything you do in informing the community in fact. You know, if you haven't found out about, you know, something from a first-hand witness, like a road closure, oh, I think this road's shut. Okay, is it really? Well, let's maybe not go up there until we can confirm that. Mobile assessment teams, off you go. Come back, report, and then we'll actually complete the picture with facts. Really important piece, get someone who can speak really well and that has the, I guess the nurses are brilliant at doing this, shutting people down who are hecklers. I found nurses do a brilliant job of it. So if you've got a nurse in your community, get them to do some of this, because in their experience in hospitals, when they get some person who really wants to, you know, grind an axe about some really minutiae single issue zealot thing, nurses are brilliant at, you know, going around the edge of the pack, pulling from the crowd and going, hey, just settle down. So use your nurses. They're brilliant in all of this. Next one is establish a system. This is a really basic diagram of what we built. There's a lot more to it than this, but this boils it down. So a system will help everyone to understand something from the same point of view. You know, any structure is better than none, so you don't have to build that. You might just have your triage bit, seeking help and offering help, and manage the rest with meetings and communication and face-to-face, all on butcher's paper, happy days. If that's what you've got to run with, that'll still work. Have confidence in that any preparation you've done is going to be better than a community that hits this on the catastrophic day with zero prep. This really worked well for us because it allowed us to shape our meetings around it. It allowed us to shape our interface with the community for those people who needed help and drove into town offering help with their 30-tonne excavator and what we'd actually do with that. And then it also allowed us to work out what we couldn't do in terms of external assistance. You know, some stuff you just can't deal with, and once you're up and running for a few days, you know that in that external assistance area, you're schooling people up to know what's available outside the disaster zone or the fire scar or whatever, and you know you can flick past them, reach out, bring people in and get people hooked up with those resources without them having to actually leave the town until that recovery effort formally can penetrate in. And so what Charleston's done is they've really thought through this kind of system and set it up so they've got a great triage point that's set up with, you know, these grab and go tubs that can be just pulled out, that have got all their stationery, all their radios, all of their like high-vis jackets and things. They've got food prep, they've got mapping, they've made some provision for first aid, and then they've also built that knowledge on where they refer to people and agencies, and they've got a record keeping capability where they've got like, it's like a wireless network where all their computers can go to, and they can all have their baseline spreadsheet that all the information goes into. Everyone sees it updating on like a common operating picture, and disco you're in, but you don't need that. You can do it with USB sticks, which is what we did because we didn't have a network. So yeah, I mean, I won't talk about that in detail, but it's just an example of what you can get up to. So a good system, even if and it must be a basic system, and I'll talk this about in the principles later on of simplicity versus complexity, but you know, that is still complex when you look at it. Take what you need from that, adapt it to your unique situation. You might come up with something that's completely unlike that and better, but have confidence in the fact that any system that is commonly understood by people who are working within the system is the best baseline and foundation you can work from, because it allows you to prioritise and task. So it's about, like I go back to, looking at what the needs are, assessing what your resources are and bringing that in and synthesising it, looking where the gaps are and treating what you can treat and flick passing what you can't. That photo there is the RSL hall in Lobethal that within 48 hours after the roads opened, filled with so much stuff, we ended up overflowing into 4 other halls. Like, it just got berserk. I think we calculated in the end, we processed nearly 11 tonnes of household items through the town. in 16 days. And it was just mad.
I remember walking into the hall and nearly having a conniption when it was literally at eye height, all of the, at some stages on the table. It's going like, wow.
So you had to turn away goods, like you ended up saying no donations.
Well, there were some perfect examples with people like rocking up with like mattresses on their roof, wasn't there?
Yeah, it becomes a dumping ground as well.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I've just come with some asbestos sheeting in case someone needs it. Dump, run, thanks, champ. You've got to be incredible. As soon as that starts, as soon as you get the drip into your effort of donations, grip it real fast on social media. Please no donations other than the following. Clean bedding and clothes. Donations of sealed bottles of water, stock feed to be delivered to this location. Really strict around that. Otherwise you'll, like we did, shockingly overwhelmed. I mean, we got through it all because we had 84 families to help. And then in satellite, we started actually supplying out to neighbouring towns to people who'd lost stuff and things. But yeah, this is where your prioritisation and tasking, really the rubber hits the road, because the needs can overwhelm the resources, but the resources can overwhelm your organisation very quickly as well. Your volunteer capacity, again, coming back to fatigue management, expectation management, don't promise more than you can deliver. In fact, promise really small to everyone and then deliver big. And beware of the fog again, that heroic nature of I'm going to get this done. And yes, the 3 pallets of toothbrushes from the Dental Association, absolutely we can do something with them. Okay, that's the fog kicking in and someone who hasn't thought before they've acted. And that's where a good system will allow that person to go, okay, we've got it, thanks for that. I'll just go and check, hey system, do we need all this stuff? No. Politely decline and thank them for their effort and take their number in case we need 3 pallets of toothbrushes later. So prioritise and task is where it's all at. And everything you do leads to doing this well in the end of the day, but don't be afraid that you're going to do it poorly, because you will actually step up to this task pretty well and you get it really quickly as long as you communicate with your team. What that tried to do is give you a context of where to start from in terms of thinking about the steps you take immediately after a disaster so that you can plan for those steps now. What we're going to do now is go through the broad sort of agnostic approach to the principles of actually planning this thing out. So you're sitting there in your community group, you've got some brand new community volunteers who know nothing about any of this. These are the principles that Chris and I have sort of come up with that we think are important to keep in mind as you're going through your steps. As you're filling out your template this afternoon, as you go and develop that further into a plan in your community, down into actually talking and educating the community about what you've done as a resilience group or organisation to get yourself as resilient as possible before the next thing that happens. Principles are about general ideas that can be adapted to your situation. Every community is unique. What Lobethal does or did isn't going to work for everyone. What Charleston has got brilliantly set up works awesomely for Charleston, but it might not work in Mylor and it might not work in Stirling. So stripping away the do this in this order in these steps, these are the general principles I think that you can help you apply a non-templated situation to fit what your community needs and what it's got as a resource. And always plan to the worst case if you can, and then wind it back from there. Noting that when it does kick off, you'll get so many volunteers with so many skills and so many experiences that you will end up filling nearly all of the gaps and then some, including the extension cord rolling up dude. So you won't be poor for volunteers if this kicks off. So the first principle is simplicity and efficiency. And I've gone on about this a few times. Complex plans fail. And if you try to make something too complex at this point and not sort of principles and simplicity based, you're going to end up with something that maybe not everyone will understand. something where information gets trapped in little pockets of it and that can't escape and be of benefit to other people. So imagine, we all have a different system responsibility in this room, and we've made it so complex that, one person doesn't know to talk to another because there's this sort of architecture that makes it so, one of my soldiers once said to me, overcomplified, that you don't know where information ends up, and someone's needs get lost against someone else's resources, and you end up, sending your 30-ton excavator to go and build someone a new swimming pool rather than actually clear a road. So simplicity and efficiency in this whole thing are the real winners of the day after your safety and risk piece. It's like my 4 points to inform the community. I only ever used those as headings for everything I did with the community. What I know, what I don't know, what I need you to do about it, and what I'm doing about it. And that simplicity and efficiency of creating messaging is, and you might come up with your own version of that, but it's a reliable sense of simple, effective communication and information management that endured, and it passed the test at the time. The second piece of that is discipline prioritisation, and this is where I talk about, what is really our priority for collecting donated goods and things like that. It's actually about meeting needs. It's not about making someone feel good who's just driven up from town with 6 dirty mattresses to donate. Sorry, but we'll give you a call. That's not a priority for us at the moment. You've got to be a bit brutal, and you've got to break a few hearts in doing that. But it's really all about meeting the need. And what is the simple message that we're trying to send to people is we have to meet the need first, and we have to do it safely. And if it doesn't fall into that sort of priority, it's probably not a priority. So everything you do needs to be flexible as well, because all of this changes over time. What you come up with now should not try to be too complex at all, because you're going to have to adapt it regardless of how good you get it now. It's got back to that MacGyver approach versus the gold-plated Swiss approach, where every Swiss child knows which bunker they're going into when a nuclear bomb goes off and the avalanche warning goes. All this, they've got it down pat, but we're not there. So flexibility in how you actually develop your plan, according to some basic principles of what we're going through here, is the way you're going to win the day in your community. We've talked at length about information and communication, and fact versus myth, rumour and assumption. But the important point for this considerations and principles piece is how you're actually going to share the information. Have a think about that. What's unique to your environment that is going to drive your communication and sharing needs? Now, there's 2 parts to this. It's how you share organisational information within your organisation, so from your ops to your logistics, to whoever's doing triage and things like that. How are you sharing information? Is that through meetings? Is that through a networked, amazing spreadsheet that you've got set up that everyone sees updating? Or is it, through a runner with a bloody USB stick just going on, doing constant circuits, updating everyone? Have a think about how you're sharing that knowledge internally. Then that next piece is externally. Again, you're dealing with confused, traumatised people. So my method of doing it, where at 11 o'clock every day, which is just a pluck, there was no actual rigour behind thinking about doing that, but getting people to meet once a day in a consistent place with a consistent message seemed to carry the day. And I recommend you have a think about how that might work in your community. Sharing knowledge over radio might work as well if you're going to have a community that could be potentially split up by cut roads, which I know some of you live in communities that if trees go over roads, you're not actually going to be able to gather the tribe to do this, and you might be busted up. So everyone knowing what channel on the UHF to go to beforehand is going to be an incredible asset to share that knowledge. And then coordinate getting the team together to get that lumber moved off the road that's mucked the accessibility up. So think about carefully how you're going to share that knowledge. Anything to add on that, Chris?
No, I think the only thing there is that back to basics is really important. So I'll cover it a bit again coming up shortly. Sounds like a broken record me saying that, but I promise I will. But having things like, we're fortunate that we've got someone who was involved in council elections. So we've got a whole heap of old core flutes that we can put up messaging on. We've bought a heap of texters and those sort of things, so that, so messaging doesn't, if the systems such as the phones and the internet are down, then if at the hall we've got some messaging options that we can use, then that's for us an important way to be able to get some of that out there. It might be that you invest in a blackboard or a whiteboard or whatever. So there's some of the things that we've developed around that messaging. Printer and photocopying paper, so we might be able to get some messaging out that way. It's and we would like to buy, and we've put in for a grant for a electronic signboard to go out the front of our hall, so that we can put out messaging to the community that way. So they don't necessarily have to come into the hall to get some of the messaging, etc. We've got a website that we can update as well. So there are lots of different options there for getting messaging out there. We haven't had any offers for carrier pigeons or anything like that yet. So no, but I think that's the key stuff, is just, by all means, if you've got the technology available and everything's working, that's great, but you might not. So make sure you've got your redundancies in place, so that you've got a simple way to get messaging out there. UHF radios, we got a grant recently, and amongst other things, we've got, I'm smiling at Vanessa here because she helped us with this, and Miranda. We've got a dozen UHF radios and a base station that we got on a grant. They're 80-channel UHF radios. Do you think they'll come in handy in an emergency? You betcha. So that's the sort of stuff that you can do. Again, if other systems go down, UHF will work as long as you can charge them.
This is the second slide in principles-based planning, which is about thinking about your resources, and the resources will come from everywhere. Of course, that human wave of volunteers that will happen, especially when the roadblocks open up, and everyone gets in there and goes, oh, there's a relief centre that's been established in here. Let's go and volunteer. That's where you're going to have a volunteer management challenge. That's where rostering comes in. That's where functionality comes in. I need you to just go and help fold clothes and sort out, help our logistics lead get that done. If you've got a system in place, when that human wave of volunteers arrives, it's really easy to delegate to people and have a place so that they can all do something meaningful, which goes back to that point I made before about giving something meaningful to people do is actually very, very valuable in reducing trauma. Just a quick sideline, is everyone as warm as I am, or am I on my Pat Malone here? Maybe we could just get the aircon knocked down a few notches, because I'm drinking way too much water up here, and I haven't been to the bathroom yet, so. So think about how you're going to manage these volunteers, and it is worth having someone looking at rostering, because that comes down to fatigue management as well. It's something we forgot to do early in the piece, and we had these the 20-year-old footy tradies. They went full noise without a break because no one actually stood in front of them and said, stop, take a break. And we nearly had a few casualties there. And yeah, can't stress it enough, manage your resources on a human front very carefully, because they do attrit very quickly. 6 hours is a good period of time to have your people going before you boot them out and make them go home and take a break. Physical resources, so minimise it where possible. You don't want to have so much physical resources like, donated clothes and all of that sort of thing, and stock fodder and all that. This is why the meetings are so important and the prioritisation is so important, to actually get that resource pulled into your organisation as it's needed, not front-loaded and stockpiled, hoping that the need walks through the door, if that makes sense. So saying yes to every bottle of water and hay bale is probably not as useful as, hey, thanks for your offer, give us your number, we've recorded that you've got a truckload of hay, we'll give you a call when we need it, or we'll get in touch and send someone out to come and pick it up. Deal, done. Then the need walks through the door 2 days later of the truck. you can then call it up and you can actually join those two things together and solve a problem in real time without creating yourself a logistical stockpiling problem.
Yeah, I think, make a comment, I guess, I think it's really important that people actually have the ability to help themselves rather than you doing everything for them.
Yeah.
You know, that they can.
And that comes to the last point down there, is don't create a dependency. You're going to have to just say no to some people. And I'll get to that in a minute and I'll talk on that point. So, and then of course funding. You'll get, so there's two parts to this. There's the preparation funding. There is so much available out there in the world for funding what you want to do, and don't think only in terms of, I need to buy a packet of markers, I'll go and look up the resilience marker grant and apply for that and get it. Because what you've got to do is sort of step back from this resilience thing in your community and look at it holistically as a community function. There might be something in the tennis club that is a grant funding thing that they might need markers for a scoreboard, and you can strengthen their grant funding thing by saying this marker not only goes and writes up for the sport scoreboard, but it also becomes an important part of the community's resilience effort, and therefore you're not leaning 100% on the resilience funding, you're actually strengthening your community's ability to win grants in other areas, nothing related to this, in sport or service clubs and things like that. And Chris has got some good experience.
Yeah, so at Charleston, we've got our overarching body is our community centre, and our emergency response and recovery group is a sort of an arm of that. So a lot of the stuff that we've put in has been dual purposed in that regard. So you know, as an example, we put in for and got an audio-visual system worth probably around about $50,000 in the hall for being able to do mapping, audio-visual, etc. But it also doubles up as an opportunity for us to do preparedness workshops. So if the CFS or the Red Cross want to come in and use it for educational activities, it beats the heck out of having a little data projector and a push-up screen at the front of the room, which is what we've had in the past, to get that done. In addition to that, you know, we can host a, you know, it might be used at a dance, or it might be used at another type of function for the community to be able to use, you know, water assets within the park that we can double up, that people can go up and fill up things with. So there's a whole, we've got a community garden that we've put in and established, but that's also under the guise of our emergency preparation stuff, because we got 2 30,000 litre rainwater tanks. We had to strip out some non-native vegetation to get that to happen. We got a whole heap of community volunteers to come in and do that, but importantly, that was part of our grant funding, enabled a whole range of things, and we were able to cross-reference that when we did our grant applications. So, you know, if someone's going to give you a grant, they need to see they're going to get bang for their buck. You know, and bang for your buck is about multi-purposing things where you can, you know, so it doesn't just sit there for the one time in 100, that it might actually be used in an emergency capacity, but you can use it for everyday stuff at your facility if you have a facility to use. So I just thought I'd throw that in because, you know, that helps you get grant funding if you have that ability. One of the things that we actually also got a grant for was a halo system around our hall. So we acknowledge that during an incident, you know, a major emergency, you know, and this is a well-established fact, you know, when you look at emergencies around the world, during the actual event, everybody is busy. Bushfire, etc. There's no point coming down to the hall to save the hall and then go back and your own house is burnt down. You know, so what we, you know, and we acknowledge the fact that people will prioritise in the first instance, and we want them to prioritise their own asset. We know that for the first 12, 24 hours or so, after, during the response to an incident, everyone's going to be looking after their own. So that was why we, at our hall, we put a system in place. So we've got a fire protection system, or what we refer to affectionately as a halo system, because it's similar to what the CFS do. And that starts basically a douching system over the hall, so that there is this ability to be able to, we can start that, leave the hall, go back and look after our own properties, and that should help protect the hall during an incident. We've got 60,000 litres of rainwater now that we can apply to that, and we test that system regularly to make sure it still functions. So there are ways that you can do that protection. You can also do things like removing physical fuel load that is right up next to your hall to increase your chances.
That's about all we can do.
Yeah.
Okay, so the difference here is you guys own your hall and you own your land, is that correct? We don't. We look after, or the community association in our area looks after the halls, but they're owned by council.
Yeah.
So who's responsible for putting that halo system up if we want it? If the community's saying we want this, who's responsible for doing that?
So at the point of being too direct here, Miranda, is that something that, can you respond to that, or do you?
Well, I'm from Adelaide Hills Council. Are you in?
Yeah, Barker.
Yep, sure. So look, I always think it's worthwhile having a conversation, with your resilience team, who can also talk to property about what your longer term planning is.
My microphone.
What is your longer term vision and your longer term plan? Because of course these things to get into, longer term budgets and all the rest of it do take time from a council. So I would say get in early with your plan and start having that conversation together. So you can chip away and work on things together. It won't necessarily happen straight away, but you've got to know where you want to end up. The other opportunity is to look at going for grants together, is another opportunity. So there isn't always funding to get every single community facility and hall up to the gold standard, within 12 months. That's not a reality. But let's look at where we want to go and start working together to get there. Where fire goes, it might be that your facility is okay and you actually support your neighbouring community that wasn't. Yeah. So if we can all increase our capacity to support each other, then together as a district, we've got that resilience built in. So I wouldn't let that put you off going for grants and becoming more equipped.
And just to add to that, and that's the discussion we're having at the moment, is looking after neighbouring communities. If we're fortunate to have dodged the bullet that you cop, then it might be that we step up in our community to still put that those measures in place to support your community. Because guess what? Next time around, it might be the shoes on the other foot, and it might be you supporting us. So yeah, I think absolutely go for it. The chances of anything bad happening are, in the grand scheme of things, are low. And over time, you build the capacity for the resources. You'll build through grants. It does take time. It does take surveillance. It needs people who can actually be looking at what's happening with the grants. And trust me, we've got Veronica on our team that does that exceptionally well. She's giving me multiple grants a week, going, oh, we got this one, we got this, and that sort of stuff that we can apply for. And we're lucky that we have that we're in that situation. But that's about building a team, because like in your community, you'll have some people who have that capacity and ability to write grants and do those sort of things. You'll have other people who couldn't think of anything worse, but they're really good at doing something else to contribute. That's putting a team together and recognising different people have different strengths. And, it will take time, but that's okay. Yep.
Just a question around, I know we're talking about grants and funds and that at the moment. What was the experience like in Logathal, and how did you manage when you're wanting people to go out initially with fuel, maybe giving generators, supplying fuel, and you're asking people about, do they have food available, product, animals? So what was the experience in that, in regard expectations of people being able to afford this? Like, did you have to provide funds for anybody, like for fuel, or to pay for the fodder that someone did provide? So was it all donated?
All donated. It was incredible. So for instance, I think we ended up with like 46 generators. And I looked at this when I came back into the town on the morning that about half of them had been donated and half had already gone out. And I went, that's a nightmare. do you know whose generator that is? No. Oh, no. Here we go. So, generator register. And this is where the discipline and the minutiae of recording everything. And where's that generator going to end up? Well, I don't know. You know, the footy trade is just generators bomb burst everywhere and no one knew where anything was. And so, and the system will always have to keep up with the reality of the chaos of it as you're trying to make things into order and you start the generator register and things like that. But the predominance of things that came in were all, here, take this. That is for the fire, go. Like Closey Supermarket, what was it, like 80 grand worth of food vouchers just dumped on the table. There's 80K worth of food vouchers. No accountability, go. And so we took those and then each one had a serial number, and then in our mastery spreadsheet thing, everyone who got a voucher went and got their serial number recorded so we know, you know, because there was some shady doubling up attempts going on and things like that. And so we knew that was all equitably being divvied up across everything. And then if we knew someone was in particular duress, we could sneak them another 1, 2, whatever. But then we could adjust those settings of prioritisation and to efficiently and fairly distribute that around our victim set.
We at Charleston were in a lucky situation financially. We own our hall and we have a fairly good monetary base for a number of different reasons. What we've had approved through our overarching committee is a $5,000 spend in availability. So if we have an emergency where we have to spend money, that we have got automatic approval in advance for up to $5,000 that we can spend in an emergency if we need to. How we would get that back, I don't know. Whether we would get it back. Does it really matter? Maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, it's available so we can at least get things started if we need to. Now, again, we're lucky to be in a position where we can do that. And I get that not everyone can. So, yeah.
But you will be surprised with what people donate. I mean, people turning up with full jerry cans of diesel and they don't ever want to see them again. There you go. There's 100 litres of diesel in 5 jerry cans. Give it to someone who needs it. See ya. And, you know, it is, let's step back from the trauma of this. This is one of the most heartwarming things I've ever done. And it makes me struggle to actually say it. But the touching of human kindness that you'll experience as part of this is something you'll never forget. So, yeah. That said, empowerment and self-reliance. The big thing is, part of this is not allowing people to make this a dependency. Now, that goes two ways. It's the victims who can get very comfortable with the, oh, everything's just been, if I say I've got a need, someone's going to provide a solution for me. My favourite one, who's still saved in my phone as Crazy Horse Chick, because she was still bugging me 3 years ago, who had about 4 fence posts burnt on her property. She wanted it laid on. And when because I didn't know she had been, I couldn't prioritise her because I didn't know what had gone on, so I just went, hey, we've got stuff, go help her. No worries. Poof, off they went. Dropped some stuff off, horse feed and stuff like that, basic, whatever it was, I don't understand it. But they dropped some water there as well, came back, and we moved on to the next target. The phone rings, Crazy Horsey Chick. She wasn't called that then, she got that name later. This is the wrong kind of feed for my horse. And she very quickly became dependent on the system, even though she wasn't a victim. And that stuff really gets out of control if you don't prioritise and find out the information correctly about how you need to help people. And that particular person stomped their feet in relentlessly to get what they wanted. And of course, then that creates anger in your team because the team go, hang on, what? And so then there was the task of having to rein the team in from lynching her because they found out she'd scored all this stuff based on, you know, about 8 square metres of burnt grass on her, you know, property. And so, yeah, that stuff goes foul when you have a dependency. The other dependency is this, and this is one of my key things to be aware of. The dependency of people needing to keep helping other people. This all has to stop somewhere or it will go on indefinitely, because this is like a drug. Keeping to, anguished person full of anxiety and trauma has come in, I've helped them and now they are good and off on a new life next. And that becomes very, very addictive to people who love helping other people. And you must control that down to a gently ended conclusion at some point, and pick that end and conclusion in advance, as far out as you can, and say, on this day, this is all ending. And it stops here, and we're drawing down to that point where we'll have a barbecue and it finishes there, done. Because otherwise this thing, because ours nearly dragged on for months because people found new ways of helping other people. And it just, the popcorn effect of it going on, both creates dependency in the people who are helping and dependency in the people who you're trying to help. And it can be quite bad. We found out in early January that SA Housing, who are responsible for the recovery piece, were going to actually come and put something into Lobethal. Thumbs up. We didn't know exactly when. So I drew up a warning, what's called a warning order, to them, which stated everything we'd done and where we were at. And it was about a 6-page document that I managed to email off to someone and they got it. And it said, when you actually give us a date that you'll start up and stand this thing up, the day before we'll come and meet with you and we'll give you a full rundown on all our case notes, all our resources, everything we've got, and that will then become your responsibility. And so that was, for us, that 6th of January, that was the end state for us, where we tied ribbons around everything we could. We had a whole bunch of outstanding stuff to say, hey, government, catch this. And then we handed the whole box and dice over and then progressively shut down the system from within, apart from the little bits and pieces that we held on to, like getting rid of the pallets of toothbrushes and stuff like that, that took some months. And it still was a need for that. There was still, it wasn't a dependency, but for some of these people, getting back on their feet meant that they had to lean on the community for some household items and stuff like that. But get rid of these system functions as quickly as you can and give it to someone else so you can get back to your day jobs. All right. I'll hand now to Chris to talk in a little bit more depth about the Charleston Experience, and then we'll drive on to the workshop, which it actually should take us about half an hour, I reckon, to get through that piece. And then we're looking at getting out.
Cool, thanks Adam. So look, the photographs that you see here are from an exercise we did that we called Test Load, to put it under load and test our systems. Back about just under a month ago. It was just about under a month ago. But look, so first and foremost, what I say is that we're not currently a bushfire safer place or a place of last resort, and we've made sure that we are educating our community about that. To that end, we've got we put out a community newsletter, which I picked up yesterday, that goes out to our community, that has a whole heap of information in there about our emergency response and the SERG, etc. So we're making sure that every family and household in our community will get a copy of this. That it's available for them to know what we're doing and what we're not doing, or what's still to come. The things that we looked at, so we undertook the CLER workshop through the Red Cross. So that's the community-led emergency resilience workshops, which were great for us because it meant that we were able to look at understand the demographics of our community, and we were able to understand our risks and put a bit of science behind them. So, ABS data, a whole range of things, some surveys, etc., that we were able to get out there just to get an idea, where the big dams were in the area, previous experiences of the big floods from 1948. Because again, we talk about bushfire, but it may not be bushfire. It could be any number of things that we have to respond to. So that was one of our first steps. As a result of all of that, we then we formed a team. So And we started to give some thought about, well, we've got this wonderful asset in a community hall that in our instance we own, which sort of does make things a little bit simpler for us. And so we managed to start getting some grants. So we got in some, because the hall wasn't air conditioned at all, so we won a couple of grants through the FRRR, which were around being able to put air conditioning into the hall, so at least we had heating and cooling. Because one of the things that we noticed after the Cuddly Creek fires, was that we had some very hot days, and if the power's out and people can't cool down or whatever, then at least we've got something we can offer people in the community, particularly those that are vulnerable. And we know, because we've mapped it, that we've got vulnerable people in our community who can come down. So we were fortunate enough to get a few stages of grants. So we got air conditioning in. Then we looked at, well, what about if we lose power? So, which we did during the fires. So, and after for a period of time. So we then put in a grant through FRRR and got a 52 kVA generator. And then we also thought, well, our hall's not really wired properly for that, and we would need, to put the infrastructure in for that. So we were able to incorporate that into one of our grants. So we were able to do a few things to at least get some basics. So we had power, independent if we needed it, and we had independent heating and cooling. So they were some of the early things that we did. We also went for a Preparing Australian Communities grant, which we were very lucky to get. That was probably only ever going to be a once-off initiative. And as a bushfire-affected community, we thought, well, we looked at the grant, you could apply up to $100,000 without having to match it or going into really detailed business case solutions. So we thought, yep, let's go for it. So we did. And we're fortunate to be one of 3 NGOs, so non-government organisations, that actually got one of those grants. And so we thought about, well, what are we going to put in there? So one of the things that we did was the large and small independent audio-visual systems. So we got a big audio-visual system, which I talked about before, in our hall, and also in a meeting room. So it gives us capacity to be able to, do mapping, etc., and have some other independent structures like that. The other thing we did was we talked before about communications. So we also put in for broadband satellite. So satellite broadband and Wi-Fi. So we've got a Skylink system. So it's completely independent because we lost mobile phones, for a period of time afterwards. We lost the ability to charge mobile phones, all that sort of stuff. So as part of this, we were also able to go, right, well, if we've got independent communication, regardless of what's happening around, and Wi-Fi, that people can come down to our hall and they can hook into our Wi-Fi through a guest access that we've got set up, and we've got independent power, so we can, and power banks so that people can charge their mobile phones, etc., then that gives us a capacity. It importantly gives the public and our community members the opportunity to come down and get to the hall, hook into the Wi-Fi and go, hey, just let you know I'm okay. Fluffy didn't make it, but the rest of us, or whatever, your messaging needs to be. But it lets people know what's happening, and importantly, you have that communication ability. So there's some of the things that we set up, and it's not on that slide, but I also talked before about the Halo system that we used, a provider to do a system over our hall. So, you put all this investment in, if you come down to the hall and it ain't there because it's burnt down, well, that's about as much use as an ashtray and a motorbike, isn't it? So, so for us, it was really important that we have we protect our investment. So we were lucky to get some of those things under different grants to get those things through. But importantly, it gives us it gives us the capability to be independent for a period of time. In that, the other thing too is that it also gives us that ability for an emergency services hub if needed. So, even if we don't need to use it for something in particular, if the CFS want to come in and use it, or SAPOL, they all know it's there, at least they can use it as an operations centre or a ZAC or what, zone emergency centre if they need to. Yep.
Just a question about generators. So I suspect the field was thinking about generators
Yeah.
And just the maintenance costs and responsibilities.
So the generator, because it doesn't get used a lot, your servicing requirements, you don't have to service them until they've done X amount of hours. So, servicing a 52 kVA generator, if on full tote odds, is around about $640. I know that because I've just had a quote to do that. We've made a conscious decision because our generators only run for about up until recently only 2 hours, but I think we've run our generator for about 6 hours. So we've still got a lot of time yet before we need to look at servicing that. And I guess probably what we've done is thought to ourselves, let's get it, and then we'll sort out the requirements later for how we, get it serviced. We know that there are a number of people in our community who are diesel mechanics or, in other areas who I'm sure will come down and help us, if and when we need that. That's one of the beauties about letting people know, particularly, for instance, via a community newsletter, that, actually I can help with that. And you reckon I've written about all that sort of stuff? We need help with different stuff. Can you provide it? It's in the newsletter. That's going to every household. That lets people know about, where we're at and how they can help. Does that make sense? Yeah. So one of the most simplistic things we've done is back to basics is, again, if we know that there's an incident where we may not have power or communication, something as simple as a red flag. So in fact, I think Veronica made this flag for us. And she got this flagpole under because we're a Soldiers Memorial Hall, we got a grant for about $8,000 to put up a flagpole as a memorial for and a garden for DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs. But so whilst we'll be able to use that for activities in its veteran space, you think it's not doubling up as an emergency flag for when we need it? You're too right we are. So it's about, again, those connections about having a grant that can do multiple things. So the red flag lets people know that we're operational, and again, that messaging has gone out in our community newsletter. Now, this is a busy slide. I apologise for that. I don't expect you to read the detail of it, but I will just give you a bit of an idea because this talks to some of the stuff that Adam was mentioning earlier. So in our group of people that we've assembled, and we've got somewhere between 12 and 15 people who are interested in being in our emergency response group. So we have roles for an emergency coordinator, triage, site manager, first aid manager, scribe, traffic management and security marshal, finance, IT, risk management, and communication and intel gathering. So they're different portfolios. Have we got them all filled? No. All right, we've got some names. Some people are a bit more able to help than others. But what I also know is that this system has to be big enough that it is bigger than any one person. Because if we're not there, in my day job, I work for the ambulance service. In the event of an incident, it is highly likely I'm going to be way, way busy doing my day job for a period of time if something like this kicks off. But I'll tell you one thing I've learnt in my day job that we're in the process of setting up. We haven't finished it yet, but we respond to multi-casualty incidents in the ambulance service fairly infrequently in the grand scheme of things. And when we do go to those incidents, we have a folder that has a number of job cards in it that are tear out. And those job cards that we tear out, so we know that when crews arrive at an incident, might be a bus crash or whatever, in their order of cascading arrival, they are given a job, all right, and a particular role. And that's endemic and trained throughout everyone in the ambulance service. We're trying to do the same concept here in that if I'm not here for a role or someone in the IT or first aid or site manager role can't get there, then in the grab and go tub that we're trying to develop will be a tear off card with some basics. This is the role for this particular person. All right, so these are the basics, just enough on one card, how to set it up with whatever they need in the tub. so that they can set up that particular function. It might be that we don't have that function set up when we first get there, but over a period of time it will evolve. So that's what we're trying to do, and it needs to be bigger than any one of us being there, because the reality is anyone needs to be able to pick it up and go, right, I know what that role is, and I know how to do it, I know how to switch on the laptops, I know what the codes are, etc. Yep.
You said that not every role has been filled. Can you highlight which are the most essential roles though?
Well, I think triage is a very important role in particular. So when we put this under test, and again, please understand, I do not have the experience that Adam's come from with this, but I've tried to learn from listening and gleaning from what happened at Lobethal, as we all have. But when we've put this under the test so far, the triage was very important, and we learned a lot about how to set up triage and where to set up and how many people to have involved in that. Something as simple as Adam said about having someone to greet them as they're walking into the hall, and explain to them the process that's going to be involved. I think ultimately having somebody who can start documenting down, offers of support, so offers of help, so equipment, and that comes in under the logistics tab. So people who can offer support and equipment or goods, etc., and also someone who can capture what somebody needs in that regard. So in addition to that, as it unfolds, you might need someone to look after volunteer management. Once it starts getting, you end up with, 150 to 100 volunteers. As Adam said, you've got, young tradie guys and girls, etc., that are, wanting to come in and give everything they can. We've got to make sure that everyone's looked after. So having someone who is aware and can roster the volunteers, but again, it might not be a function you need straight away, but at some stage you will need it, because if in the debrief, if things go wrong, you want to be able to understand and learn from it and go, well, what didn't we do well? Well, those people, they were out for 12 hours and they've been working, before they came in, they've been working all day, they came in and then worked a night shift. No wonder they crashed or whatever. So that's the sort of stuff, we've got to try and mitigate that risk. So I think they're the most important ones. I think having somebody potentially with a first aid background is useful there in the facility in case someone comes in. If you can't, I was working on the day of the Culley Creek bushfires. I ended up treating patients for a number of hours until my house came under threat and I had to leave and say, right, that's it, I'm tapping out. But we couldn't get ambulances in for a long period of time initially, or when we could get them in, there were certain places they would go. So having an ability to do some, at the very least, minor first aid, so you don't have to be an encumbrance on those organs. Only call them if you need to. So so I guess that is something you might want to consider. Does that make sense? So yeah. So anyway, so that's what we've in the process. Have we got it finalised? No, we haven't. It's very much a work in progress, and it involves having enough committed people, but importantly, documenting what the key roles are. Now, we've got some of that stuff down there of what we think the key roles are, but again, putting that onto a one-sheeter so that people can come in and do those particular bits is what we think will be the best bet. The other thing we did is now I completely hold my hand up and say I have plagiarised a document that was largely put together by the Adelaide Hills Council or the Local Government Association with input from Adam, etc. So this is that community hub document which you may or may not be familiar with. If you're not familiar with it, I strongly suggest you get familiar with it because it's really good. So that is about, and when Adam talked before about simplicity, all right, you start thinking, well, when's the centre going to open? What sort of events? Well, and what's it going to do? So we looked at that and we started coming up with a whole range of things. And then we went back to that document and went, actually, this is what we think is going to work. So we want to be able to offer information about the emergency and to amplify official messaging. All right, we think that is important, particularly if people don't have phone or internet access, etc. They may have radio access, etc., but that might be about it. So we made sure so one of our important roles is around someone doing information gathering and amplifying official messages. So that's one thing our centre will try and do. Referral for support services, again, as per the flow chart that Adam showed. And again, some of that will be stuff that we can do. Some of it might be stuff that gets outsourced to somewhere else that we don't have the capacity to do. And that's okay, because we can't be all things to all people. You know, and if we grow it, the capacity throughout, then if we can offer it, then all well and good. If we think there is a need there, and that's that sort of ability to be adaptable, as Adam said, is depending on what the need is. Initial first aid I talked about. Temporary shelter, maybe, you know, after an incident, particularly if somebody is vulnerable and it's really hot weather and there's nowhere else for them to stay, they might be able to stay down, at least get some reprieve from the heat or the cold, you know, or whatever it might need to be. Maybe some light refreshments. So part of the volunteer management and that structure might be about making sure that our volunteers and that people that come to the hall are fed. You know, do we have a relationship with another organisation that can do that? We've specifically decided we're not going to be a major food processing place, because we know that the Woodside Lutheran Church have a number of people down there who did that brilliantly through Cuddly Creek. Why would we try and double up and do that when they can provide that? We'll work in with them in tandem. You know, so we need the key contacts for those people if we need that, but we do have to have some local capacity to feed our volunteers so we can keep the engine running. So now back again to this is from the hub document that we looked at, and we've adapted it a bit, but essentially our centre might open a variety before, during or after a variety of emergencies, including, so responding to an emergency when the state government responses are not activated. So we know through the Charleston Experience that there've been incidents in the Adelaide Hills where there were responses that weren't quite at the level where the state government came in to do particular things. Well, is there a role for your local community to be able to fill a gap in some of those areas where the state government resources are not fully activated? It might be as an immediate response before an emergency response centre may have been activated. All right, so that's, again, you know, one of the early things, and which is what you know, Adam and his team did over at Lobethal. Assist when the community is isolated from emergency services or essential utilities. Again, so we have the capacity to be independent if we need to be for a period of time, and that needs to be scalable. You know, so down the track, you know, applying for some more grants to get some decent first aid kits. You know, what do we need for if we do have a mobile access team or a response team, etc. You know, what do they need? UHF communications, particularly because once they leave the protection of the building, there may not be mobile phone communication. So, you know, having thought about what channel we're going to use, how we're going to communicate. So that's the scope of our operations, is more or less those three things at this point in time. So is there any questions around that so that's just a very brief snapshot of what we've done at Charleston. You know, please don't think we're the gold standard. We're certainly not. We are very much a work in progress. Will we, you know, at our test day, did we get stuff wrong? Absolutely we did. All right, but you know, the key to it is I'd rather get it wrong there and learn from it. And importantly, we just started very, very gently. So we got maybe, I think it was 15 families come into the hall with some scenario cards and got them to run us through our paces of recording and doing some system stuff. And we realised pretty quickly that some stuff was not going to work. You know, so we reorganised, did the stuff that Adam suggested around groups, etc. Around you know, having a meeting to say how are things going, a common operating picture, stuff that, you know, we're having to learn as we go. But again, you know, like, that's cool. That's what we learn from. And we also sought feedback from those who came in and pretended to be losses, etc. Yep.
Don't
So what we did to start with is a couple of weeks before, Adam and I talked about an old army concept called rehearsal of concept. So, and so that was a way that we could put it under the microscope and walk it through. Do you want to talk a bit any more about that at all? Or
Sure. It's sort of like the practice you do before you're going into the game. It's that muscle building, strengthening piece where you have a concept that you actually run through stage by stage and invite that commentary back from the team who's supposedly going to actually do it to start thrashing out some of the problems, like exactly that. Well, triage, I don't know how to do that. What if I stuff it up? Okay, let's put some measures into place, reduce that risk. And so, a job description of what to do and what not to do and stuff to look out for. Hot tips for young players. There it is. Produce that. That's in the go-to box. Done. Solution.
So there's some of the things. One of the things that actually tended to work surprisingly well for us in that was because we started out with, so we got a grant for some laptops. So we got, I think it was 3 through renewal, let's say. We've also put in for some grant for some new laptops because we realised we probably need more. With our system and our Wi-Fi, we have an updatable spreadsheet that is live, so that we can make sure that we can, and that we were able to type stuff in from the triage that updated to logistics to all those different areas, stop the need for us to have to do a USB run to each other. So we actually tried putting that system, and it worked actually pretty well in the grand scheme of things. A few things that we need to learn from. But the second thing to that was we also made sure we've got the redundancy of being able to have, so we bought about 500 or 1,000 of those little green cards, the little notes cards, etc., heap of stationery and pens, etc., so we can write stuff down. So if that system, for whatever reason, goes pear-shaped, and we know, for example, at the moment, our Skylink is down, it's not working. So we've got a fresh one that's arrived yesterday where they've replaced it for us completely. We're going to have to put that up at the hall because it's for whatever reason, it's now broken. So we're going to go, you know what, if that happens during an incident, that is not cool. So we have to have a backup to be able to do that. So we've bought USB sticks, we've got those other backups to be able to run that around if we need to.
Did you do police checks on people who are part of your response?
So we haven't as yet. So at some future stage, so like a gold standard, you'd have everyone that's had police checks, you'd have working with children's for anyone that's going to be in that space or whatever, and that will come in time. But it's just a matter of, it's the old thing, if you build it, they will come, if you remember that line. So, and again, I just warn people about paralysis by analysis. If you want, as you build it, you will realise there are things that you will need to do, and from a risk perspective, some things will get priority over others, but over time, we know that those things will evolve. But we're a small committee in the great, we probably get, at an average meeting, maybe 10 people along, 10, 12 people. As we evolve, we'll develop that capacity. Good question. It is diligence and it is stuff that we need to consider. Are we there yet? No. Is that okay? Probably. For now, in the grand scheme of things, and we'll build it as we go.
Good. So that we can get onto these templates, we'll just conclude by saying that, something I always push to government people is the best money you can spend on this resilient stuff is now, because the cumulative effect or the exponential effect of what you put in at the preparation phase to prepare a community vastly outweighs the spending you can do in fixing all this stuff when it goes wrong and you've got a smashed community with everything gone. It goes back to your preparation of being able to get a family out of a house with some stuff to keep them comfortable for a few days. Even if they lose their house, they feel that little bit of empowerment. And empowerment goes a long way because in my experience, the best recovery stories are when communities recover themselves. They're not sitting there with a hand out going, what are they called? Not grants, but oh, my poor house burnt down, give me money. It does nothing but create a dependency. Sure, it helps a bit and you can replace stuff with it and great. But the magnitude above that, which empowerment replaces grant and handout money, is phenomenal in reducing trauma and getting families back to a sense of normalcy. The last thing I say in every single one of these I say is, unlike me, by about day 4, don't forget the children. Children will suffer indefinitely through this if you don't think about what you're doing with them. It's all very apparent adult environment trauma, fire, risk, threat, priorities. The poor old kids just get dumped there with an iPad and they don't get attended to until someone goes, oh, let's think about the children. How do you do that? What do you do there? I don't have all the answers, but those children have the opportunity to see their adults functioning very well through trauma or very poorly, and that should guide your work in that area. Leaders and resources are not always in plain sight as well. So think out about, what other clubs, what other groups, what informal things can you poke your finger in and say, hey, resilience, do you want to be a part of this? Come and join in with us and come and contribute to that part of the discussion. And then what else might you need outside of this? So you're going to be starting to think when you leave today, well, there's all these possibilities. You bet there are. You can go full noise if you're got nothing better to do and develop this up to Swiss standard. Or you can just keep it simple, have that sheet in your back pocket for when that disaster comes, you get through it and then you turn around and go, you know what, we've got this template here, and that's the best starting point you can have versus anyone else who's done nothing. Final note, thank you all for coming. It's a privilege for me and Chris to be able to share what we've learned with people who have proactively gotten on top of this in their communities. I encourage you to maintain the rage and the fire in your bellies for this, because it makes a big difference, and you'll see that if ever you get to execute this. Lunch is on the way out. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.